You asked for it. This is Illiterate. This week we're covering Pachinko. My name is Evan. I just checked out the Apple Plus series.
My name is Taylor, and I looked into international gambling statistics.
Woo!
Here we go.
There's so much to get into. There's so much to explain. This story is massive. Pachinko is on Apple Plus right now. This was an episode suggested by one of our listeners, and this is an incredible suggestion, and we thought, why not? We have seen it creep into a few lists of the best stuff on right now. So, oh man.
And there's already Emmys talk, and yeah.
Pachinko is based on a New York Times bestseller, and it is a massive story, a parallel story in the 1920s and then the late 1980s, centering around the grandmother of a family who, gosh,
basically what it ends up being in the briefest, it's multi-generational, over 80 years. Sunja is the main lady, and she lives in Japanese-occupied Korea and then emigrates to Japan, and the family ends up becoming wealthy in the 80s by running pachinko parlors, but it's her kids, the grandkids, it's everybody here, there, and in between.
It's generational. It's political. It's cultural.
Historical.
It's huge. It is so much bigger than anything I thought I was getting into. I had no idea, and it is expensive. It's expensive looking. I was pretty blown away, and I'm really excited that this is starting to get a lot of talk. Everything of what was happening in Korea and Japan at the time. So let's dive right in. I mean, What in the world? Let's start. What in the world the title even is, because even off the bat, I think a lot of people are confused about that.
Right. Pachinko is a Japanese gambling game. The closest thing, not in terms of the mechanics of it, but just like slot machines, just like really flashy, quick. It's not 6 rounds of poker. It's a machine game kind of thing, and huge adult, of course. Also, it's not for kids.
See, the first thing we thought was Plinko, like on
right, yeah,
Prices. That Price is Right, or
it's close to that. Yeah, so it's a game where there's these little silver balls. It's almost like pinball standing upright. The balls shoot up and then go down, and wherever they land, you get more balls depending, and you can keep playing. This, I did not realize, is so huge in Japan. $200 billion annually, which would be 2 times the export revenues of the Japanese auto industry.
Oh my God.
So that's Toyota, Nissan, Honda.
Oh my God, yeah.
And then, of course, gambling-wise, it's more gambling revenue than Las Vegas, Macau, and Singapore combined. Just
oh my God,
Pachinko.
Oh my God.
Yeah. When I started looking into this, I said, this is the first thing we have to talk about. My God.
Oh my God.
So basically, for the Japanese people, 1 out of 7 Japanese adults plays this regularly. It's like manga. If, like our My Hero Academia episode, it's like, this is another massive thing. The way that it became so ubiquitous, so gambling for cash is actually illegal in Japan. When I looked into this, I said, how can this be?
Okay, I did not know that. Yeah.
The biggest thing. So the pachinko balls that you win cannot be exchanged for money because that's gambling and that's illegal. You're getting money to gamble. Nor can they be removed and exchanged somewhere else at another parlor, because it's like, well, how did you get this? Oh, I gambled. You're exchanging something for money, illegal. So it's kind of like a Chuck E. Cheese or like some other thing where you get tokens or tickets. The pachinko balls that you get, which can number in the thousands in baskets underneath these machines, are then traded in for prizes. So you could trade it in for a pen or a whatever. What 99% of people do is trade it in for a, quote, special prize, which would be some toy that's priced at $400 or whatever the pachinko balls, the actual winnings is of the jackpot. You take that thing out to an off-premises vendor who's independent to the parlor and sell that worthless thing to them for the cash value that you obviously won in the pachinko parlor.
Interesting.
So then those vendors that are technically not affiliated with the parlor sell the thing, the teddy bear or the plastic toy or whatever, back to the parlor with commission, which then creates profit for them without violating the law. This is what happens in the show as well, but you could see how this would be a great vehicle for the Yakuza because of money laundering and racketeering, how this whole
Right, right.
convoluted three-party system works. It's obviously not as much since the 90s. They have really cracked down on the mob aspect of this, but this is the legal way that this all gets worked around.
Yeah, seems really fraught to manipulation and
Yeah.
seems really open to just being, bent in any which way, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's created a lot of issues. So there was a study in
Yeah.
2014, the pathological gambling tendencies in Japanese men is 9% sociologically. In North
Wow.
America, it's only
Right.
1.6%. So
Wow.
it does affect the culture and
Yeah.
populace a lot more. And if you remember in our Squid Game episode, the creator, Hwang Dong-hyuk, he had read that book, Gambling Apocalypse, where there's this cruise ship where you gamble and you die. It sort of
Yeah.
inspired him for that. And it's a manga, Japanese, but you could see how that would be a very popular manga, knowing now this
Yes,
aspect
yes, yes.
culturally, that it's such a huge piece. So yeah, that's the title of the novel and the show, and it's because eventually this is what this family, which we'll explain in the historical stuff, like why they would get into this and become successful
Mhm.
as Koreans in Japan, which I don't even know if they get too much into the pachinko side of things straight away in the show.
No, no,
Yeah.
no, no. That all that stuff is really yet to come. I only
Yeah.
got into the first 2 episodes, so you don't really see much of any of that except for in the opening. It has a great
Yeah.
title sequence.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, but no, all that stuff is to come. But you see the way that the narrative is set up. Really quickly, you get this parallel story that shows you, like, okay, so it's going to lead to that.
Mhm.
I'm really interested in that. We've been talking about manga so much because it
Yeah.
kept coming to mind while I was watching it. I had the present mind thought of going like, man, some of these shots, some of the cutting in here, the way thought is expressed feels like all the anime I've been watching the last year. In particular, it really brought to mind a filmmaker that I've fallen in love with. I'm going to butcher the name, but Makoto Shinkai. He recently did a movie called Weathering with You, and then one very famous Your Name before
Yeah.
that. And they have these beautiful, really empathetic, quiet narratives that have these genre twists on them where they're both dealing with parallel timelines that
Mhm.
somehow intersect. They're a little bit more genre than the Pachinko. Pachinko is definitely a historical, real thing.
Yeah.
But in the way that it was telling these two parallel timelines, I instantly was brought back to his films, the sensibilities of his anime films. Very this quietness that it is so much more prevalent in Eastern
Yeah.
media. But I felt like if I was going to see a Shinkai movie adapted, I would want to see it done by this director.
Right. Yeah, one of the things, since you'd mentioned kind of some of the stylistic stuff that's different, the book, because this is not based on a manga, like you're saying, it is
I
based
was
on an
going to
actual
ask if
massive,
it,
yeah.
yeah, if it was a novel, but I was going to ask if there were any other adaptations before we've gotten here.
No, no, this is the first one for
Interesting,
this
interesting.
particular book, and the big difference is that the book unfolds chronologically. It does not jump around.
So that's
So
a
it's epic. Yeah.
hats off to the film. Yeah, no, hats off
Yeah.
to the filmmakers behind the series, man, because it is presented in such a way where I was certain. I mean, it was almost without saying zeitgeist level. Like, obviously, that's how the book is, is set up. So
It's
that
framed to
what
compare. No.
Oh my
Yeah.
god, what they
The
bring into it within the first few moments, then the work they have done to present the narrative, the way that the story will be told to you, the work they have done is
Mhm.
immense. That's incredible. You're compounding my appreciation for it immediately.
Yeah, so that's I skimmed the book a little bit and got a flavor for it and whatnot, but even at the beginning, it starts with Sunja's father's childhood, like, it goes even before her.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
just to set things up, and then it just goes chronologically,
Hmm.
and certain characters, die or other things happen, and it just follows straight through. So, obviously, if it's paralleling this more modern timeline, with the grandson, that takes up more real estate than the actual book because
Right. From
it's
what I can
yeah,
tell right here, the purview of the narrative centers around the grandson and the grandmother. And then
yeah,
when we go back to that's in 1989, and when we go back to the 20s, we're at the grandmother at around, I would say 6 to 8. I don't know if it's explicitly
right,
said, but
yeah,
she's a small child. And
yeah,
so that point of view is pretty evident, getting like, okay, so we're going to have to understand what the grandmother has been through to lead her up to this point. The whole crux of this is that the grandson lives in New York, is a successful businessman, and he's coming home to try to convince her to sell family property.
yeah. And she's in Japan,
Yes,
correct? Yeah.
He's going back home to Japan. He's actually Korean, but they
Mhm.
have grown up in Japan.
Yeah. That made me think about, like, who has written this massive epic tale just straight through. I wouldn't think it would be a 94-year-old woman who had lived this. You know
Mm.
what I mean? Like, who,
Mhm.
uh yeah, like you said, New York Times bestselling, finalist for the National Book Award for Fiction, came out in 2017, was immediately bidded on and bought by Apple, and then took 4 years to make. But
Mm.
the writer of the book, Min Jin Lee, she came to the US when she was 7 from South Korea and grew up in New York City.
Okay.
Went
Okay.
to school for history, became a corporate lawyer for a second, quit to write in 1995, and that's what she's been doing ever since. She wrote a
Oh.
first novel that was rejected everywhere, and then in 1996 started this novel called Motherland, which involves this Korean Japanese intermingling and the history behind that. Worked on this Motherland novel for 7 years. It was terrible. She said she just gave it up.
Oh no.
Yeah, yeah. Switched to a different novel, which then became the first novel that she actually got published in 2007, called Free Food for Millionaires, which now I think is
Mm.
also being developed for something. Got tons of awards, NPR, Times of London, New York Times Editor's Choice. It's about a young Korean woman in New York City, so more her
Okay.
lived
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
experience and the family and cultural situations involved in that. Once this novel got published, her husband got a job in Tokyo, so she moved there and lived there for 4 years. This is when she started talking to people there, Korean people living in Japan, rethinking this motherland idea, because with her interviewing and knowing more people, she saw completely differently how people actually were. It wasn't this singularly biased interpretation. It's like
Gotcha. Yeah.
they don't see themselves as historical victims. They're ordinary people caught in history. Thus, now you can even see the Pachinko idea of the ball just going down in like
Right.
eventually, now after a long time of working on this, it comes out in 2017, the book, and is
And it takes off like a rocket.
revered. Yeah. I love the first line of the book, which is, quote, "History has failed us, but no matter." And then it just goes into the story.
You know what? That reminds me. And now a story.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so the interesting part of it is, like, it's an omniscient narrator because she really likes the old 19th century fiction like Charles Dickens and like kind of like we had when we covered the Goldfinch a million years ago. This
Oh,
long,
gotcha. Yeah.
sweeping, massive third person point of view that knows
Gosh, yeah.
everything. And she says she identifies with minor characters, so it's like they're all minor characters going
Mm.
through. But as far as getting all of this, she majored in history in college, and she lived in Tokyo for a while, but during that time as well, she worked straight from interviews to inform the characters, like, it's a composite of this person and this
Mhm,
person and
mhm.
this person. She has boxes and boxes and boxes of notes on historical events and people. I saw in an interview, she was like, "With every single page, I could have had footnotes for either the historical references or interviews that I did," which
Oh,
is pretty
wow. Yeah.
cool. I would almost wanna read a book version that she has the little subscript numbers and the references to all the stuff that
Well,
she pulled from.
I bet, I bet after watching the show, it would, if somebody was really into it, that going back and then getting into the novel or vice versa, reading the
Mhm.
novel and then watching the show, I'm wondering, we'll see, it's to be discovered how much might be changed.
Yeah.
It seems as if they might really complement each other as an expansion in both directions, where the way that the story is being presented and told in the show is
Mhm.
so different than sitting down and reading it beginning to end. That beginning to end is going to have so much more that never even makes it into the show. But the way
Yeah.
that the show is told is so effective. It's so energetic and beautiful, and it compounds it packs it with so much emotion that you might otherwise not get on the page between pages or lines.
Yeah.
It feels like these things really might be an awesome companion piece to each other. It does not always work that way, and sometimes it frustrates you if you're trying to do that with things that just like that wasn't the point. But it sounds like there might be a lot here that could compound this experience between the two mediums.
Yeah. Well, so the person responsible, Soo Hugh, is the creator of the show. 4 years to make the project, 6 months just to cast the actors, because this is this worldwide search.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
like you're saying, in terms of the tone and the complimenting, she had said she read through the book and wanted the dialogue between generations to be more apparent, and realizing that was the through line for her as a creator that hit her the most, hence the
Mhm.
time jumps.
Mhm.
Also because she didn't want it to be a Korean version of Masterpiece Theater, this period piece thing, and if that's all it is for the first, you know, 6 of
Yeah.
9, it's like people are gonna dip
That's
out
hey,
or
that's smart. That's that now you're talking about what's the difference between the book and the TV show. That's how you sell a TV show. That's how you get people excited and be like, it's the same story, but the way we tell it when you're watching a show versus reading the book is completely different.
Yeah.
That's an incredible on point decision. It's like you are interested in these themes. Well, what helps you compound those scenes? Well, let's cut against the two actions. You're going to see
Mhm.
something set up in one timeline. Now you're going to see it completely answered in the next one. We're going to jump back decades.
Yeah. So
You don't miss. It's not like you miss what's going on between the two scenes. It's so abrupt and it's not. I wouldn't say it's fast, but it's
mhm.
not blissfully waiting. You're not going to miss the point. It's very, very concisely directed to the point where it's like I'm like need to go look up a piece of food that they were making because like the food is important during it and it looked delicious. But it's
Yeah.
again one of those anime things that seeped into it. Um,
Yeah.
but like
So
the way that it is comprised, that it is shot, is so intentful. You won't
mhm.
even in the most no words, you'll get that. It's so on its face obvious, and I'm saying that because I think the director has done an incredible job of telling you exactly what the point between the two scenes between the decades are.
Yeah, Soo Hugh, the showrunner, she was also the head writer. There's some other writers, but she was primarily. And, this is also hard to remember because she had started pitching this in 2017 to get it developed before the international multilingual precedent of Minari, Squid Game, Parasite. So it's like, who will buy a show
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
3 languages filmed internationally? Over 2/3 of the dialogue is in Korean or Japanese because she's like, the book is written in English, but we can't, if we're going to show the cultural tension between Korean and Japanese, they can't all be speaking English. We have to feel the difference in the languages.
Something that really struck me because it wasn't explained to me, I've never really come across it, and then it clicked very quickly, and it really exemplified what you were just talking about,
Mhm.
is that it is three languages, and that while you're in the subtitles, these people might be using one language and the other intermittently. They might completely switch out in the same sentence. And
Yeah.
I had never seen that communicated in subtitles before. So I'm looking at it and it's yellow and suddenly one word is blue and the rest is yellow. I'm like, wait, whoa, what? And it's because I don't speak either language. I'm not hearing
Yeah.
where it changed. And so it takes me a second. Eventually, I realize when he goes back to Japan and when certain characters are talking to him, blue is Japanese. Yeah, and
Yeah.
then I'm starting to understand that is really exemplifying the thematics there about the fighting between these two cultures.
Yeah. It's
The
also
tension present in all of these scenes. It's all
Mhm.
littered with this idea, and it seeps down into the subtitles. I had never seen that before.
Well, you can imagine the hellacious process of both pitching and then producing and making this, because it in a strange way ties to our Coda episode talking about subtitles and
Hmm.
translation and whatnot, because Soo Hugh had to translate not her herself, but get, how are we going to translate these
Yeah.
scripts into Japanese and Korean and the dialects that we want, depending on where they are,
Oh
and
my
the
gosh. Yeah.
historical
Yeah. Yeah.
dialects for when they're speaking in the 1920s. Like it's a lot of language stuff going on in this. So that was a bunch of work in terms of getting it made.
Bunch of work, and it's presented unflinchingly. It's so confident, and it's so
Yeah.
obviously part of the mission there. Once you start thinking, when I'm doing the work, like what's going on, blue, yellow, all of it comes together all at once. I'm like, oh my God, it's kind of like the whole point.
Yeah. And then you had talked about expensive budget similar to The Crown, 13 million per episode. So
It
this is
looks it.
a lot.
It's strikingly beautiful for something I really had no idea what we were walking into. I'm kind of expecting a cheaper show, and it's like it is an outright epic.
Yeah. Yeah, and because, part of it is, like, bridging the types of content, the precedent of K-dramas and getting those people involved. Lee Min-ho, one of the main actors, is a huge K-drama star, just something that sort of encapsulated the experience for the creatives involved. So they, because of filming during COVID, they couldn't really film it all in Japan, filmed some in Korea, but they filmed a lot in Vancouver, rebuilding everything as if it
Mhm.
was a period fish market set. So again,
Wow.
a ton of work, but like people still found out that Lee Min-ho was in Vancouver filming this thing. And so the creators said 50 people found out. People are screaming off on the sidelines while they're trying to film. And
Oh
just
my
also in Canada,
God.
all types of fans. And they're like, oh, this is what we wanted, is for this to be not just somebody who wants to see a
Right.
period Korean drama, but look at the people screaming for this guy in Vancouver for this. It's not a matter
I
of have we achieved this. It's like we already did before before we even got it, that people would be interested in this.
And what
Yeah.
a great decision to have the Minari grandmother, young Yo
Mhm.
Jung, as the grandmother in the '89 timeline. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, no better, who better? I
Yeah.
mean, seriously, if you saw Minari and you went, who's this lady? I want more of her. Bam, bam, we got it.
Yeah. You had talked about the food, and it was curious because I looked into that too because it's huge, both from a historical standpoint and just a cultural standpoint. Definitely
Yeah.
connects
Yes.
Korean people and as a family. So the props person, Ellen Frund, who had worked on a bunch of stuff, I had just seen Mad Men thrown out there as an example. She
Oh yeah.
went and worked and learned from Soo Jin Kim at Seoul's Food and Culture Academy in Korea. And kind of interesting, like not just the food and the techniques and the wares that were used being period appropriate, but also like an Asian pear now is valued for its size. And she said it was the same problem
Mm.
in Mad Men because apples in the 1960s do not look the same as apples
That's
now. So it was
cool.
like the proportions of the food, what they looked like trimming down the cabbages for the kimchi or trying to find the smallest cabbages that were grown because they just weren't the same shape or size
If
or anything.
anybody out there has seen a Miyazaki film,
Uh-huh.
Spirited Away, that classic idea, this anime food and the way it's presented, the cultural elements of the way it's presented,
Yeah.
that I have never seen it so successfully done on film. uh, Seriously, it is such a quiet, intimate thing, the nonverbal that's really cluing you into
Mhm.
these people, these characters, these cultures, and it's something I only see out of the East. I have never seen a really touching montage of somebody like making a baked potato.
Yeah.
Or, like,
Yeah. Slapping together a
it's
hamburger, yeah.
no,
Yeah.
like I struggle. The closest thing I get to like what that achieves is like maybe in Django Unchained, there's a great sequence of a beer being poured at the tap. But
Yeah.
those things are just not valued in Western media the way they are valued and presented in Eastern media, and
Yeah.
it's really great.
Yeah. And then speaking of Eastern media and the creator Soo Hugh and what I just found there's a very interesting thing that she did with the creative process of this, and it's called the Thousand Miles Project because she grew up in Maryland and it seemed like a
Hmm.
universe away to do anything related to films. Or like she didn't even know that you could be a screenwriter any of that kind of stuff as a
Hmm.
kid. So she, as a part of the development deal with Universal
Yeah.
Content that she's working with, she said, you also have to put your money where your mouth is. And so there's this incubator program for Asian and Pacific Islander stories. Like I said, it's called the 1,000 Miles Project because she's like, it felt like 1,000, it's like it shouldn't be 1,000 miles away to have this happen.
Right.
So 20 writers, and then out of those, 3 will get a 24-week development process for pilots. I just think it's so cool that it's like, yeah, here's
Yeah.
somebody who's like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
an easier path than I had, tons of film school debt, entry-level jobs. Now somebody who is paying millions of dollars to make something also put money into people to continue to make these things like this.
Right.
So I'll post a link to that as well. But
That's awesome.
something that this gets just briefly compared to is K-dramas, and we had mentioned it already, and it's kinda like,
Right.
was this that? I would say yes and no. It's sort of a Hollywood version, and that's why it's gotten buzz
Right. I
because
mean, you're also gonna like see some actors that you might recognize. Like
Right.
like there's an actor from It's Almost Sunny in Philadelphia in it as the American guy,
Right.
Jimmy Simpson. So it's not like, again, it's 3 languages. English is there. There are sequences of it that are fully in English. It is so much more than just this or that. And what an
Yeah.
amazing story that covers all of this time, all of all of these cultures, and
Yeah.
really has something to say about, well, what is our responsibility to each other, and like, well, I don't know. I'm really interested in the thematics that it's laying down. I don't know exactly where the whole thing is going to end up, but I'm
Yeah.
interested in seeing the pull of the West and the East, and then the infighting of the East, and from the grandmother's point of view. And now you have the grandson coming in with Western ideals and doesn't
Mhm.
understand what they have been through. It's a lot going on, and I am so thankful that something like this has gotten this type of money, this type of talent, and this type of attention out
Yeah.
there. If this is sounding like something not for, like a K drama, like we're talking too much about anime, I don't like anime. Again, like
Yeah.
Jimmy Simpson from Always Sunny is in it. So-
Right. The very small, because I had seen of the 637 cast members in this, 95% are Asian. It is a lot of new people as well, or people that you don't know. But like you're saying, as far as the K-drama situation, this is a
It's like
Hollywood production. Yeah.
they're pulling the best of the best. I mean, again, like they can't go to they can't go to location in a different country without people screaming. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's really, it is top of the best. It's the best type of project to be able to pull from those areas, so it can actually transcend labels like K drama.
Yeah, I will say because with K-drama now, it has changed quite a bit, and I won't get into too much. Go to
Sure,
our
sure. I
Squid
mean,
Game
and that's
episode
part of
if
it,
you
is
yeah,
breaking down. Yeah.
yeah. The Squid Game episode, we covered somewhat of the basics of it, but just in terms of something similar to this, it's like K-drama does very much have a whole subgenre of the historical type drama, and
Hmm.
obviously this is a huge part of Korean history. So this particular time period from 1910 to 1945 is going to be involved in some of these historical stories. There is Eyes of Dawn was based on a 10-volume novel, spans from when this is happening, colonization, World War II, the Korean War, 270 actors, 21,000 extras.
Whoa.
This came out in 91 and really cemented the new wave of Korean drama. But it's like
Oh my
that was
god.
one of the first and biggest ones. And then there
Oh
has
my god.
been a lot in Korea about Korea, but that's sort of what makes this different is it's on Apple Plus, for us buffoons who don't subscribe to K-drama.
Right, like the
Um,
Minari grandmother is, again, in her own right, massive star.
yeah, 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 yeah. The last thing to kind of go through is just very broad strokes. Since we've been skirting around it, what the heck is this even talking about? We're talking about 80 years of a family and this and that, but kind of just in general, the Korean diaspora, Korean Japanese relations, the history of that. I looked into it a little
Yeah.
bit just for our audience and Evan to get and
Yeah.
for me to get a glancing blow on
Oh, so you
what
don't
any
need
of
it,
this
Taylor?
is. No, well, I desperately need it.
We
Um,
all need it.
yeah. So the word that is used, and probably in the show as well, Jainichi is the foreign residents of Japan. That's literally what it means, which makes no sense because these are Korean people who they're not technically foreign, but that's then the misperceptions and the strife that comes from it. And so Koreans are the second largest minority group in Japan, and this terminology refers to the Koreans who came to Japan before 1945 and their descendants who faced discrimination following World War II, limited jobs, and this is how they came to own 80% of all the pachinko parlors in Japan, is because this was perceived as a lowly, dirty job. And even now, people there is discrimination or eyes of concern towards people involved in this.
Jesus.
So that's kind of where that's the some of the history. But yeah, Japan, and this is the big thing, occupied Korea from 1910 to 1945. So that was there was no Korean government.
It's no surprise what side they're on come 1940.
Yeah, so
come World War II. Oh God!
And
I really just hadn't considered how imperialistic they really were aspiring to be. I really, really did not have quite the biggest grasp on that. This is bizarre.
And so 1910, Korea gets annexed by the Japanese Empire without consent of the Korean emperor. 8% of the farmland in Korea was under Japanese control around this time. And just for some context, by 1932, 52% of the farmland was under Japanese control. But the actual Japanese population in Korea was less than 3%. So not as many Japanese going to Korea, but just unauthorized rule over things. So a lot of stuff. Korean currency was abolished. They're saying you're going to use this, just slowly whittling away at the culture. In 1911, the royal palace, Gyeongbokgung, was demolished. This thing was built in 1395.
Oh my God.
Huge, 500 buildings. The restoration of this, which was crazy to me, didn't even start until the 90s. So they started rebuilding and replacing and taking down what was the Japanese governmental buildings that were put in its place. And so what I could tell by 2009, 40% was restored. It's now a cultural touchstone again. March 1st in 1919 is a big moment because the emperor previously had died. There were rumors of poisoning. So this is now the start of these, what was then perceived as illegal independence rallies. And so massacre there, continued suppression of culture, forced to worship at Shinto shrines, removing the religious aspects of it. And then in terms of education, in the late 30s, when the war is in overdrive, this Korean language was actually banned. So like teaching and speaking Korean is prohibited in Korea.
Oh my God.
And I'm sure they'll get into some of this in the show in the later episodes, but like there was this, and this is the craziest thing that I learned from all this, the policy to change to Japanese names if you lived in Korea. So in 1940, this was when this was instituted. And by August, 80% of Korean people had changed their names to a Japanese surname.
Oh my God.
Which is crazy.
It's a cultural erasure.
Yeah. And people be like, well, why would you do that? And it's like, if you didn't, you can't enroll in school. You're refused government service. You're excluded from rations and supplies. This is in the middle of a world war. So yeah, just now that the war has picked up, in 41, there is a counterforce, the KLA, Korean Liberation Army, which participated on the Allied side. But as far as Japan is concerned, 5.5 million Koreans were conscripted for Japan's war effort, and 670,000 taken to Japan for civilian labor. So then that's a lot of where you get the terminology and the native Koreans who then are living in Japan. Yeah.
Oh my God. This is this
it's a lot of history.
I just had no idea how Germany they wanted to be. They really were on the same track.
Yeah.
They were all, oh God.
Yeah.
I think the history history teaching in this country, there's certainly a lot that could be done to improve it. But one thing is that, good Lord, there should be more focus on the Eastern
Yeah,
the Eastern
definitely.
theater and what the impacts really were culturally around Japan in the East, because we talk obviously Poland 1939, but like I've really
Yeah,
not understood how much pressure how much pressure was put on the East all around Japan because of
yeah.
what was happening in World War II.
Yeah, and it did, we have certain portions of that history. So, for example, like I said, the hundreds of thousands of men conscripted into the war effort in Japan, 70,000 of the victims in the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were Koreans that
Yeah.
were working in military
Yeah.
establishments or just being civilians there, as well as
Now
on the
that's
yeah.
again, because you say they're brought to work. That's concentration camps. No,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's
Yeah,
some
that's
movement
a
there, but
nice
it's
way
like,
of saying right,
you have
right.
to help in the war effort. Yeah. And then on the women's side, this is horrible. 200,000 women forced into sexual slavery for Japanese soldiers. The term comfort women, that's where that term comes from. But this is all Korean women who are still seeking reparations for all of this.
Right.
So yeah, 45, the war ends, Japanese rule ends, and then immediately you have the US on the southern side of the peninsula and the Soviet pressure on the north, Korean War.
Oh, what do you want, grandson? Oh, sell our sacred family land? Sure.
Yeah,
I don't,
yeah.
I'm
So it's like,
just to go back to like this. There's so much that gets these people up to the point that we find them in 1989. This has all of this cultural stuff is all compounding to the point where, okay, now grandson is off. He's living the life in America. He's so disconnected from
yeah,
all of that, which is the problem. That's why this works for an American audience, because this is really the problem here is the grandson coming back with these Western ideals washed of the history in the East and not understanding why he can't bridge the gap here. Why he make her move. And then getting into this history, well, that is the work of the show, really, is trying to help get behind, like, well,
yeah.
why would this woman not move on this? Well, when you've been through as much as she has.
Yeah, yeah. And that's Min Jin Lee, the writer of the novel, was saying when she was researching and talking to people in Japan and whatnot, she had just time and time again, it's like, why are you centering it on this person? She's like, everybody that I talked to talked about some matriarch in the family, some grandmother who had sacrificed so much and is still out on the street in some food stall on her feet selling stuff. Also translates in a way globally, universally, most people do have some maternal figure who keeps it together, and you cannot imagine the amount that they sacrificed for a future generation that they maybe would never see.
Yeah, just when you start thinking about who this character is, for her to end up in 1989 and be who she is, to be asking what the grandson is asking of her is to negate a lot of history.
Yeah.
That's a very, very, very beautiful place to hang the crux of a show in your first episode.
Yeah.
Because there's so much to get into there. God, man, this is so much bigger than I ever imagined. I thought it was good. I thought this was going to be a gambling episode. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No.
Well, I am really, really, really glad that an audience member suggested this, because this is exactly the type of thing that deserves a little bit of context, deserves a little bit of required reading, a little bit extra. And again, like we said at the top of the show, we're seeing it creep into some of the best on right now. That was more than enough clearance for us to to get into it, because we hadn't heard about it before the suggestion. So hats off to the listener that sent that in. Thank you so much. And again, anybody out there listening, if you are into the show, let us know what you are reading. Let us know what you are watching. What are you excited for coming out? What are you all about? We want to be all about it too. And we want to help spread the word. So let us know. You never know when we'll do an episode all about that thing. At IlliteratePod on Instagram. Also, please give us a rating, give us a like, give us a heart. If you want to help us out, that's as simple as it gets.
And then the other way is spread the word. Tell a friend if there's an episode that you think they would love, or they said, well, I was thinking of watching that show. Give them that episode.
Or that one. Ooh, I don't like that. Looks like it's this. You might know better. Send them our show. Maybe we can change their minds together. We thank you for sticking with us. It means the world, and we will catch you next week. See you then.